Hi, it's Chris again and welcome to another of the Epix systems walkthroughs. Today's walkthrough is all about the client wizard. So that's specifically adding new clients and everything that goes with them, such as client branches, contracts, assets and addresses. So we'll begin by demonstrating how to get into the client wizard and we'll follow the wizard through. For the purposes of today's example, I'm going to be adding a new client into our demo system here. And the client will be a borough council with 2 branches, and we'll set up a couple of different contract types and a couple of assets to show you how it all works. Bearing in mind, of course, that some of the words used within my demo system may be slightly different to the words used in your system, and that's because we can caption things differently. So we may call something an asset and you may call it a site, or an address and a property, but they generally mean the same thing, and if you are in any doubt while you're doing this, then do get in touch and ask. To step into the client wizard and begin the process, the easiest way of doing this is to access it from the manual job entry screen, so as if you were going to create a job in the system. So if we click on create and simple job, we get the familiar job entry screen. And the first thing I always do before I even begin to add a new client is I check that somebody else hasn't already done it for me. So I'm going to add a new client called Epix Borough Council. So I'll start to type the name of Epix, and as we can see there are no results, so nobody's gone in and done this before me. So we're good to click on the plus button here next to the customer field to begin. So as we can see, we are now in the client wizard screen. The first step in this process is to add the customer record. Now again, this could be called something different in your system, and also the fields that are listed here may be captioned ever so slightly differently as well. If you are unsure, then do ask, but the general premise should be the same. So we begin by starting on the reference field. As we can see, this is a unique key field to the record. Generally speaking, we would use the account code for the customer as it features within your financial account system. So I'm going to go with Epix 001 for our new client. The customer field. Now this is how the customer name features on all documentation that would go to them. So this would be the full name. So this is Epix Borough Council. The next field that's required is the SOR list, also known as sales codes. You may have a unique list for this particular customer. You will need this uploading before you create the client record, but I'm going to assume on this particular one that we are going to use an existing SOR list within the system. And so I shall press the question mark. We've got 2 set up in our demo system, so I'm going to go with the SOR codes with bonus. And then we move on to the address field. And similar to the customer, this is the actual address of that customer, usually their invoicing address. Similarly, the postcode. And we can also add invoice addressed contacts, telephone numbers and email addresses as well. So if I add in some generic information here. The tick box for show codes on invoice, this will influence whether or not the SOR codes appear on any invoicing. So if you want the codes to appear, then you tick that box there. And you may want that if you're using a schedule of rates list, where you've got many codes and the client will recognize those codes. The tick box for archived, we don't need that now, but that would archive the client if you no longer do work for them. And the application or invoice drop down, this allows you to choose what we raise by default when you charge a job. So if you want it to always create an application for this particular customer, then you would select that here. Likewise, invoice there. The bottom section of the page is the branding section. Now this will only appear if you have branding switched on within the system, and you'll know that if you've got a unique logo up here, for example. So you can see we have got this switched on. We have our logo and we have differently coloured menu items and menu text. What this bit allows you to do is upload branding information specific to that client. So for example, you can add the client's logo in there, and that way you could then use that logo within some of the documentation. If you wanted to, say, produce a letter for that customer, you could do that with their logo within it. But I'm going to leave this blank for now, and we shall move on to the next section by hitting continue on the bottom. So as you can see, we've got a green message here to say that the customer was created successfully. And as we can also see just below that, we've now moved on from the new client screen into the new branch screen. Now the branch screen is where we get the opportunity to add a client branch for this particular client. Now you might not use this, you may well just simply have one client and that's all. In that case you still do have to add a client branch, but you would just add one, and you would probably call it something like head office, just so that you've got that branch in there to allow you to move on to the next step in the wizard. But just to show you how the client branch works, if your client is split into multiple divisions, so for example a council, it could be that the different branches all require their invoices to be sent to somewhere ever so slightly different because they've got different account codes, that kind of thing. You may wish to split those out then into a branch, and so we can do that by adding a reference. So I'm going to call this Parks, and this is Epix Borough Council Parks Division, for example. And the account reference may actually be 001-P for Parks. And what that will do, that will allow you to, when you generate an invoice for this particular client branch or any sites that belong to it, the invoices will go to the account code that you specify here. You can change the information here as well if you need to. I'm not going to bother for now. And then when you're done, you can press add. And pressing add adds a new table here for the new branch that you've just created. And we can use the edit or delete buttons to either modify what you've just done or delete it. Or we can use the fields here again to add further branches. So I shall add another one for us now. So I'm just going to add the legal team, for example, here. So we've got the Epix Borough Council Legal. And I'm going to call that -L for legal. And I'm going to press add. So again, we get the green indicator that the addition of the branch was successful, and as you can see now we've got 2 records. So you can add as many divisions as are required for the client, but bearing in mind that many of our customers actually don't use this at all, and you just simply have one branch called something like head office so that you can then proceed. So if we very quickly add a 3rd branch to this client, and we'll do this one for the housing division. And the account reference for this one could be -H, and then press add. As we can see, we've now got 3 branches listed. Clicking continue on the top right will then save. The 3rd screen in the customer setup is where we add contracts for the work that you're going to do for this client. Now this is usually influenced by work type, could be influenced by price list, and can also be influenced by the requirements of the client. So for the purposes of this example, I'm going to add 2 contracts. These are going to be for reactive works and for planned works, and both of them are going to be on different price lists for the customer. For this example, I'm going to use the company division of the Quality Homes Maintenance in the contractor field, and then the Manchester head office for the depot. Now the contract number could be defined by the client, particularly if you're interfacing to them, in that the reference could be a unique value that has to be the same on both sides of the interface. For this example, however, I'm just going to simply type an abbreviated Epix-React, and that's because in the contract field I'm going to call this Epix Borough Council Reactive Works, and that's the description of the contract or the work type that this relates to. The price list field, these are the prices that are associated to the sales code list that you chose for the client earlier in the wizard over here on the new client bit. And so if we click on the question mark, you can see that we have an Epix Borough Council reactive price list. So I'm going to choose that one. Now it is possible to add a price list if the one you need isn't there. However, there'll be a separate video on that, we won't cover that right now. The start date and end dates are the dates that you want the contract to run for. Now this could be a financial year, it could be an open-ended contract, or you could have a very defined date range. So I'm going to set this one to the beginning of May, expiring at the end of the financial year of 2021. The invoice terms are the payment terms that you want to appear on the invoice for any jobs that relate to this particular contract. So it will take the default from the system options, but you can override this on this screen by editing this value here. Now the tick boxes here, the first two in this system are referring to the secondary ref. Now that's the additional reference that you can enter onto a job when you're creating it. So just to demonstrate that, if we click to create a simple job, the secondary ref is this field here, and this is the one that features below the main job number, the mandatory field. It's the optional one that you can enter a additional reference, a purchase order number, or whatever you've got yours captioned to be. So this particular field is referring to those values, and where we are asking you to charge by secondary ref, what this means is if you've entered a reference into that field when you created the job, then that reference will be displayed on the invoice when you come to do that at the end of the job. Likewise, this particular field here, this makes that field mandatory. So if you were to raise a job for the Epix Borough Council Reactive Works, then you'll be required to enter a reference into that field. And finally, similar to what we had on some of the other screens, the archived tick box. This will archive this contract, and it'll mean that it's no longer visible when you're doing any searching or logging for jobs. Below all those, you've also got the work types that exist. So again, if you've got any work types or work plans or scheduled work, the work types that relate are here, and you can link those to this contract if you need to. Once you've finished with this screen, you press add to add this contract to the system. And as we can see, that has now appeared in the table here, where we can again click to edit or delete as appropriate. I'm going to add a second contract now, using the same contractor or company division and the depot that I used last time. The contract number will this time be the planned works. So this is going to be the Epix Borough Council Planned Works contract, and again I've got a price list already lined up for this one, so I'm going to choose the one for Planned Works. And again, the start date and end date, I'll go with the same ones. This section here allows us to copy assets or properties from another contract to this one. So at the moment this isn't particularly useful to us because we haven't got any assets, because this is a new customer. However, if we'd stepped into the client wizard on an existing customer and we were creating a new contract, we would have the ability to copy all the assets that exist for that client that may already be on another contract over to this new one. But I'll explain that one on a different video when we're looking at how to edit a client. So I'm just going to press add right now, and now we have two contracts available to us for the Epix Borough Council. We can then move on to the next stage by clicking continue at the top. Now the next stage in the client wizard may be the new address page, or it could be, if we quickly go onto the next page, it could be the new asset page. Now, whichever one of these appears for you does depend on how your data is set up and whether or not you have this particular screen turned on. But the new address page is primarily designed to deal with what we would call a parent asset. So if you do works, for example, in tower blocks or blocks of flats, the address or the parent asset would be the actual block, and then the asset would be the flats contained within. So this way you could raise a job to go and visit the actual block, say a communal area, or you could also raise a job for the individual flats or apartments within that building. So for today's demo, I'm going to create a parent asset as a block of flats called Epix Towers, and I want that linked to the client branch of housing for the council. Now the site reference, this could be supplied by your client. It could also be a UPRN, a unique property reference number, or it could simply just be a made up number that they've given you, or if you don't have it at all, then you maybe need to come up with your own naming convention. I would always recommend doing something similar to what you've done for the client code so that you can keep a track of your different references and where they're up to in the sequence. So for this one, as Epix Towers, I'm going to call it EPT001. And the address, this would be the full address for that property. So I would include the name of the property and then the location of where it is. And then a postcode. Now the region field, this is optional and can be used to help you narrow down your searches for properties or categorize them into a region. So it could be a geographical area. Say you split your operation between the Northwest and the Midlands, you could flag this particular site as against the Northwest. And likewise, this field also appears in the operative setup, so you can categorize operatives into regions as well. So when you're issuing a job, say for this property in the Northwest, you could narrow your search down to view operatives from the Northwest as well. As mentioned on previous screens, the archived tick box, this does the same thing. It will archive the address. So you don't want to do this right now, but if we were stepping into the wizard to archive the site so that you no longer do work there, then you would do that by ticking that box there. The charge address and postcode and the invoice address, contact and their telephone number has been pulled through from the client record. Now this is where the invoices will be sent to if you do generate an invoice for this job. Now you can change that if you had a particular requirement for an invoice to go to a certain place for Epix Towers, but the rest of the client stays the same, then changing it here in this setup will allow you to do that. The section about letters here we're going to skip past. This relates primarily to the call centre application, but we can access letters and communications from within a job sheet, and that'll be covered on a separate video. Now the two tick boxes here relate to the contracts that we set up on the previous step. So as you can see, we have the reactive and planned works. Ticking one or more of these enables you to log jobs against that contract for this site. So if the site only ever had planned works, never reactive, then you could click on that option. But I want both to be available, so I'm going to click both of those. And again, like you saw on previous pages, the work types for the work plans or scheduled works, if that relates, you can do that as well by clicking on here. Pressing add will add this site to the system. And if we click on the address search here and press show, if I just tick show all for now and press search, as you can see, we have now got Epix Towers. Clicking continue on the top right will take us into the new asset page. Now, as mentioned earlier, you may have landed on this page already straight from the contract step if this particular screen, the new address one, hasn't been switched on. And this is where you would add the assets that relate to either the client or, in this case, to the address that we have just added in as well. So I'll begin by choosing the same branch of the housing division, and then I want to link this to the tower block that I just created of Epix Towers. And the reference I'm going to give this particular property is EPT001 -1 for flat 1. The asset template field we can largely ignore. That allows us to create a template style for a asset, but actually it's just as quick to free type this information right now. So the asset field, this is what is the asset. So in this case I'm going to call this a flat. It could be a site, it could be a house, it could be an apartment, it could be a maisonette. However you want to describe or categorize your assets, that's what goes in this field here. Similarly to previous screens, the account reference, if you're billing things differently to assets than you are, say, to the client, if you want to raise an invoice to a specific place where it goes in a specific account code in your accounting system, you can do that by specifying this here. But as you'll notice further down, it has already picked up the default invoicing address for the client. I don't want to change that, so I'm going to leave all this alone and I'm going to leave everything set to the client. So I can scoot past all of this to here. Here is a section for contact details for the asset. Now this would usually be the resident or the tenant, so whoever is your contact at the site that you're going to do the works. So I'm just going to put in Mr. John Smith for this site, and I could put a telephone number in here, and this telephone number would be what appears on the operative's PDA app when they get a job for this site. When they have the opportunity to call the resident, this is the phone number and the name that they will see. Again, we've got contact email and any notes you wish to add. That could be anything from the resident is deaf or hard of hearing, that kind of thing. We'll cover the address file uploader on a separate video, but this is basically a tool that allows you to upload assets in bulk. Rather than doing what we're doing here and free typing it, this will allow you to bulk upload a large file of addresses. Again, the contracts tick boxes, these are the contracts that exist for the client, and again we can tick which one of these are applicable for this particular property. So I'd like to have both available to me. And again, the work types. As seen on previous screens, if you're doing any scheduled works and you want to create jobs of that type for this particular asset and include them on those work plans, then you can do that by ticking here. But once you've finished completing the fields that you require on this screen, you then press Add, and this will create the asset for you. Now, the final step in the client wizard is to click Finish, and that will then end, giving you a summary of the client that you have just created and any assets or contracts that belong, and you can then press Close. Now if I was to enter the client name here as if going to create a job, as you can see the client now shows, and then in the branch field also the 3 branches are showing, and then in site I can choose Epix Towers, and then finally in the asset screen I get the opportunity to log a job either for the flat within the site or the site record itself. And by choosing the flat record, you'll notice that the name of John Smith and the telephone number I entered has also been pulled through, and the available contracts that I can log work for are the ones that I ticked when I set them up. So that's the client wizard in its basic form. There are a few bits and pieces within there that I didn't cover because they are more advanced features and not necessarily available in the majority of systems. So if you do again have any specific requirements of this, or you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to get in touch. We'd be happy to help.